Hello everybody, today we are going to talk about floor time, what it really is and what it isn't. Floor time is a comprehensive program for infants, young children, families with a variety of developmental challenges. The element of the DIR floor time model includes D, the functional, emotional, developmental levels, I, the individual processing differences, R, the learning relationships that will help the child move forward in his development. So, in short, the learning relationships that are tailored to the child's individual differences will help the child move up the developmental ladder, mastering each and every functional, emotional, developmental capacities that they are capable of. So, floor time models involves not just floor time alone, but it also includes occupational therapy, speech therapy, physical therapy, educational programs, counseling, support for parents, and intensive home school programs as well. That's a mouthful. When we talk about floor time, I want you to think of it in two ways. First, the technique, and second, as a philosophy. So, floor time is a specific technique where for 20 minutes or more a day, a parent gets on the floor and work with a child, playing with the child. It is also a philosophy whereby all interactions incorporate features of floor time and that we are able to move the child through a particular goal with that kind of interaction. So, be it speech therapy, occupational therapy, or educational goals, they can all incorporate features of floor time within their interactions. So, floor time is the cornerstone, the engine that drives the DIR floor time model and the engine that drives the developmental process. So at the heart of floor time are two very important emphases that sometimes work together and other times they seem like opposite ends of continuum. So the two are number one, following the child's lead, and number two, joining the child's world and pulling them into a shared world in order to help them master each of their functional, emotional, developmental capacities. So the late Dr. Stanley Greenspan said that they are two sides of the same coin. So the idea of an analogy of a coin and the imagery of an engine makes me think about the paper spinner. So on one end, when we pull, we are pulling the kid up the developmental ladder, and on the other hand, when we are pulling very hard to follow the child's lead. And when we pull both ends together, the magic develops and the magic happens. So the paper spinner spins and we can get the engine going and things are happening. And this is what I mean. So when we pull both ends, the paper spins, and that's where we get the interaction cooking, and that's where we can actually drive the child up the developmental ladder. We go on to look at one of the major emphases in climbing up the functional, emotional, developmental ladder, the ability to follow the child's lead. We will then dissect and look at what is floor time and what is not floor time. The most widely known feature of floor time is following the child's lead. Why? Because when we do that, we are harnessing the child's natural interest. And by doing that, the child's natural interest is pointing us to the direction of their emotional life. However, this goes against the principle that is very much ingrained throughout the history of education. Educators think that children have to be taught in order to learn, and we can't allow a child to do whatever they want because children are historically viewed as creatures of their instincts and creatures of primitive pleasures. So they would never be socialized if they are allowed to do whatever they want and we are to follow their lead. So take for example, a child who is rocking and humming. This seems to be inappropriate. It's something that we should discourage. But yet, it is something that is meaningful and pleasurable to the child. So, can we actually respect that interest of theirs and join them in their world rather than just inventing something that is not really following their idea, ignoring that behavior, or changing the topic abruptly just to avoid that topic that they have been talking about for a long period of time? Well, they are human beings with real feelings and real desires. They may have a problem or a set of problems, but they are not the disorder or the set of problems themselves. So we know that we are following the child's lead correctly when the children entered shared world with us with friendly looks, friendly glances, and warm smiles, instead of running away from us, looking annoyed and irritated. So this is the second part in climbing up the developmental ladder. It is helping the child master their functional emotional developmental capacities. So what is this FEDC that we are talking about the whole time? It is their basic social, emotional, intellectual, language, and academic capacities. And when we are doing all these, basically what we are really looking at is the whole tree. So there are 6 core developmental capacities and 3 additional ones that we are looking at. So the 6 core ones are the ones that you have already covered in your 101 course. If we are looking at an educational model or behavioral model, they are literally just looking at the fruits. So be it math skills, reading, the ability to attend, those and executive functioning, and those are core skills that an educational model or behavioral model is after. And they are after these fruits through rewarding behavior and also ignoring those undesirable behavior that they are not wanted. So in climbing up this developmental ladder, we have to be mindful that we are meeting the child at where they are at to provide the just right challenge. So we provide them with thinking and problem solving skills over and over again, and we are working up those 6 FEDCs that we have been talking about the whole time. If we are looking at an educational model, they will be requesting the child to repeat a task over and over again, and the repetition is what that drives their learning because they are doing the task again and again. They are remembering the task without thinking, and they are just responding to the task at hand. But for floor time, it is different because the challenge will be different every time. It's not exactly the same. So this comes up with very different learning paradigms. So for floor time, we are looking at proactive learning, and it's learning in its true self. But for other models, we are looking at quite a reactive kind of learning style, and we would be better off calling it training. And as such, we have to remember the last piece, which is affect. So in climbing up the ladder, floor time is based on affect diathesis hypothesis, where life is dually coded. So instead of the sensory and the motor connecting together, we now know that it's sensory, affect, motor. And this is why the emotions are connected to our motor planning. As such, we have motivation and generalization that comes very naturally and it's for free in floor time. However, the generalization piece and the motivation piece are not necessarily free, in other models and behavioral models and educational model continuously talk about, oh, is this skill generalizable in another environment? And also, we get this for free in Floortime only when we use our effect. So you have to really keep that effect on. If not, we have to really rethink what we are doing here. Is it training or is it learning? When we think about the D for development in the Floortime model, we always think about the two poles in Floortime. On one hand, we are to follow the child's lead, and on the other hand, we are to create opportunities and challenges for the child to master their functional emotional developmental capacities. It is also important for us to tune into their individual processing differences. And when we are able to break down the I in the DIR, what we do is we can move from pathology to potential. So instead of labeling the child as a fussy, picky, lazy, impulsive, controlling person, we can now really identify the root cause and really analyze why they behave this way, how they interpret and perceive and act on the information that they receive through their senses. And we are able to understand the child in this way, we can adjust ourselves to help the child through the Floortime model, instead of just training them, manipulating them through repetitive tasks. And I really like the fact that it is a DIR model. The I sits in the middle between the D and the R. So for me, what this means is that I informs the D how we are going to change our approach when we work with the child, and at the same time, it's going to inform us about the R. So as and this can allow relationships to flourish as parents move away from being resentful because this child is so picky, so difficult, and it can actually help the parent to understand the child's individual needs, and knowing that this child has additional preferences will really help the relationship to flourish by understanding their preferences. Relationships. This is Achilles looking at his tendon. So spoiler alert, this is about reflection as much as it is about relationships. We all know that relationship involved back and forth exchanges. So in Floortime language, this is called circles of communication, and we always have to be mindful that this is bi-directional. So as an SLP, I know that my shortfall in my early years were commenting. So I can be quite relentless on commenting, and but we have to be very mindful that the child is sharing attention with us, and that the word is used in a meaningful context, and that we are following his interests. So it can't be a one-way street, and when we are commenting. So when two people interact, there is a shared sense of consciousness that is formed, and they co-create meaning together. And through that, babies expand on their own sense of self in relation to the world of things and people around him. With unsuccessful repairs to ruptures in relationship, the baby can take part in co-creation of shared meaning. His sense of self shrinks, and he feels small, disconnected, and separated, and this leads to withdrawal and shutdown. Infants rely on caregivers to co-regulate them. Without it, they can't feel safe, and they need to feel safe in order to socialize. So as caregivers, as therapists, we need to take care of ourselves so that we can have the extra energy to co-regulate the child during a meltdown, and we shouldn't be so stressed that we are almost dysregulated ourselves. So when we have the emotional availability, we also have the effect to continue to feel connected to them. So if parents themselves are anxious, they will not be able to respond to the child's distress. And when the child is not able to connect with the anxious parent, they will go into fright, or fight, flight, or freeze. And lastly, what are our natural strength and weakness? What do we do so easily? Are we the high energy sort of person that are great for kids who are underreactive? Or are we the sort that takes the child's avoidance as personal rejections and we shut down and we don't try as hard? Or do we go opposite? Are we going to be more intrusive and not pay attention to what makes him happy and just force our way to get the child to pay attention to us as opposed to wooing him into a relationship? So these are great points for you to wonder as we take care of ourselves as clinicians, and then we help the parents through our relationship so that we empower them and they can move more to be more emotionally available to floor time the children through nurturing interactions. In summary, I've talked about what floor time is and isn't in the three components of the floor time model: the D, the I, and the R. For D, we have to be mindful that we are following the child's lead as well as challenging them by providing opportunities and giving the just right challenge to help the child master each of their functional, emotional, developmental capacities. For I, through understanding their unique biologies, we help the child climb up the developmental ladder so that they can be masters of their own senses and not victims. And for relationships, we empower the dyad as a fundamental unit of development. And we also know that the fundamental development unit of development was never the isolated baby. And as such, the soft nurturing touch are the ones that will penetrate deeply into our being. And with that, I've come to the end of my presentation, and let me know if you have any questions.